What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Spider-Man. It is finally time to start talking about the Spider-Man movies here on this channel. The only two Spider-Man movies or Spider-Man related things that I've talked about here on this channel, other than a couple announcement things here and there, are Into the Spider-Verse, the animated Spider-Man film, one of the more recent ones, and the most recent one with Tom Holland, Spider-Man Far From Home. They're the only two Spider-Man films that have come out since I've had the channel, and outside of other things like Endgame that I've reviewed as well that include Spider-Man, those are the only two Spider-Man films that I've actually touched on. I also want to take a moment to thank my guest who is joining me here on this channel, Pillot Productions. We're going to be hearing from him in just a little bit. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. But for now, let's get into my thoughts on Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film, the beginning of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. Sam Raimi, most known at this time for probably the Evil Dead franchise, even though he had worked on other things. It is pretty crazy to think that they would, kind of translate him as a director into something like this that's a lot bigger and a lot different than some of the other stuff that he had done, but without a doubt, definitely a phenomenal director, and I think he shows his chops right here on top of all the other stuff that he's worked on. A really, really solid installment in his filmography, and I really just love the way he directs this film. We're going to be talking a little bit more about Sam Raimi as time goes on. But yeah, on an overall level, I love the director choice, and I love the way he directed this film. You also have this beautiful musical score throughout the film with really, really iconic and memorable themes done by Danny Elfman, one of my favorite composers of all time. I actually have this thing right here signed by Danny Elfman with Jack Skellington in the background. I can't tell because the camera's flipped the other way around, but if there's I have a ring light, so if it's all shiny on this right now, then this is kind of a waste, but this is a signed thing from Danny Elfman. All that to say that I'm a huge fan of Danny Elfman, and thoroughly love his score in this film. Beyond that, you have a phenomenal cast with people who literally just brought the characters from the pages, from the animated shows, from the video games, straight to live action beautifully. You have Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker and Spider-Man, easily my favorite of the live action Peter Parkers. I think as far as the Spider-Man character goes, I enjoy Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland the most, probably Tom Holland more. I've always loved that duality of having Peter Parker be this dweeb, this guy who's continually still picked on and is still kind of the little guy, but once he puts the suit on, he's the hero, but he's able to kind of be a different kind of guy. He's a little bit more quippy and a little bit more jokey, and I think that they've really captured that mainly with Tom Holland, but I think Andrew Garfield also did that really, really well. I just feel like their Peter Parkers, Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland, are a little bit too attractive, a little bit too cool, you know what I mean? I don't really buy them as the dweeby kind of guy that I think Peter Parker should be, and I think Tobey Maguire nailed that, whereas with them, they're a little bit more like awkward, cute kind of dweeby, rather than being like full-on dweeb that I think, again, Tobey Maguire captured really, really well. And I should also add that up to this point, comic book movies, things like Star Wars, Marvel, and DC, they were everything to me at the time, and they still pretty much are. But at the time, especially with Spider-Man, he was one of my favorite characters of all time, still is one of my favorite characters of all time. Whether it was the animated shows, the video games, the comic books, I was constantly diving into new Spider-Man material, and he's been a character I've always been pretty well versed in, especially the Peter Parker version of Spider-Man. And so when this movie came out, I was a kid, I was absolutely in love with the movie, and I just remember that first experience of seeing it in theaters like it was yesterday. The movie theater was completely packed. It was a sold out show. People were sneaking into the theater. There was literally people that worked at the theater that were there watching it on opening night, like ushers that were coming in and not cleaning the theater and were just watching from the sidelines. There were people sitting on the staircase of the theater, total fire hazard, but it was just such an amazing experience because you could tell everybody was just so excited, so ramped up to see live action Spider-Man, you know, because there was that Japanese Spider-Man series or movie from back in the day that's terrible, but this was the first ever live action Spider-Man done properly. And it was a big budget, fun Spider-Man movie that looked beautiful, and outside of a couple moments of some pretty dated CG, the movie works on pretty much every other level. I think for me, still to this day, this is one of my favorite comic book movies. And of course, you know, it's hard nowadays when you've had such incredible things like The Dark Knight that revolutionized things, but now we're also to a point where we have things like Avengers Endgame that has been this huge culmination of years of storytelling that is able to be epic on a level that a lot of franchises are incapable of being able to reach just because of the nature of the way the MCU was formulated. But when you look at just individual comic book movies, I think still to this day, this movie, Sam Raimi's first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, is still one of the best to ever grace the screen. Such an exciting watch, so well acted, so well put together on a direction level. The music just really conveys the feeling and emotion of the film, really kind of putting you into the movie. And overall, it just felt like taking that original source material, you know, adding in its own flavors and things that make it feel unique, but overall making it pretty faithful, you know. And that's something that I really enjoy about this film, is that it is so faithful to that original source material. And sure, there are big differences from the source material, like Tobey Maguire's version of Spider-Man being able to have the web slingers or the web come out of himself, which anybody who knows Spider-Man knows that he always kind of has like a contraption that has like the cartridges and stuff. So, you know, there are some creative liberties throughout the course of this film. But as far as how he became Spider-Man, you know, the classic story, I didn't even reiterate it because I figured you guys all know it. Peter Parker, dweeby guy, gets bit by a radioactive spider, becomes the titular character of Spider-Man. And yeah, I think that they just nailed that basic concept and setting up the story and setting up the franchise with this first film in such a great way. It has such a great sense of conclusion by the end of it, where you don't even need a sequel, but it does have a really great sequel that comes after that. We're going to be talking about that on another day. But yeah, overall, I love this movie. I love the way it was put together. I love the way it honors the source material while also giving itself its own identity. I love the casting. Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn and Green Goblin, absolutely phenomenal casting. He really becomes the character. Those moments where he's acting with himself, playing the two individual characters, playing the Goblin and playing himself as Norman Osborn. I love that. I mean, Willem Dafoe has to be one of the best castings of any comic book film still to this day. And this was one of those earlier comic book films that really began to set the groundwork for what we are kind of dealing with today, this huge oversaturated market of comic book films. And I just remember the initial excitement for this. I remember the marketing. I remember the toys. I remember the video games. It's just such a happy time in my life, such a simpler time. And this is also one of those films that really is part of the reason I'm in love with film. Beyond being a huge comic book fan, beyond being a huge Spider-Man fan and loving this film on that level alone, this film really helped me fall in love with film. This is one of those films that I've seen dozens and dozens of times. You ever have those movies in your life that you're absolutely a huge fan of, and you would just love to be able to like look at like a counter to see how many times you've actually seen the movie? I have to imagine with this film, it's well over 100, and I'm not trying to exaggerate at all. There's just, you know, a lot of comic book movies that I really love that I've seen maybe close to 10 times or something along those lines, and you remember them well because, you know, that's just how you are if you love a movie like this. But yeah, I've definitely seen this movie close to, if not over 100 times, and I just love this film on almost every single level. Before I pass it on to Pillot Productions, I do want to mention as well, I love James Franco as Harry Osborn. You know, he plays a big role in the film, and the chemistry between him and Peter is really great in this film, or him and Tobey Maguire. But what I will say is, you know, his character really doesn't start to blossom as far as the performance he's able to give until the second and third film. But I really do love James Franco in this film. He plays the character so well. And then you have Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane. And I would say out of all the casting, she's the weakest for me. Sometimes she could be a little bit annoying in these films, and I don't know, I guess for me, I always just pictured a different kind of Mary Jane, whereas I feel like everybody else in this film just plays the character that I was reading on the comic book pages and seeing in the animated shows and the video games. They brought those characters to life in their own new fun way that really honored those characters. And in no way, shape, or form am I saying Kirsten Dunst is bad in this movie. I think she plays the character of Mary Jane really well, and overall, I love her performance in the film. But I would say she's probably my least favorite as far as the main cast, as far as the casting. There's just something else that I was kind of looking for when it came to a Mary Jane casting, and it just wasn't there for me. But overall, I do think she does a good job in the movie, and yeah, I've been rambling, but as you can tell, I love this movie. Now, let's go ahead and get to what my friend Pillot Productions had to say. Definitely loved hearing his thoughts on this, and I can't wait for you guys to hear them. So let's go ahead and get into that.
Hey guys, Dempsey from Pillot Productions here, back at it again with another review in collaboration with my good friend Anthony Perez. Thank you so much, Anthony, for having me back on this channel. I especially enjoyed our last review together for A Night at the Museum, so when you asked me to come back and review today's film, I was especially excited because it's honestly one of my favorites, so I'm not even going to beat around the bush anymore. Today, we are here to talk about Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film. This film stars Tobey Maguire, Willem Dafoe, Kirsten Dunst, and James Franco. Based on the Marvel comic book of the same name created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, it chronicles the early days of Peter Parker, as well as his eventual transformation into the legendary hero Spider-Man after he gets bit by a radioactive spider. By now, his story is a tale as old as time. I mean, everybody knows who Spider-Man is today, but back in 2002, I don't think that was the case. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think the character has ever been as big as he is right now. Think about it. Currently, he's in the middle of his second live-action reboot, and simultaneously, he's got his own animated franchise as well. And both of them are incredibly popular. I mean, forget about the fact that one of them is attached to like one of the highest grossing cinematic universes ever, but still, he's even got his own video game franchise that seems to be kind of building its own world as well. It's just so crazy to me how, you know, superheroes and the superhero genre is so immersed and so important to pop culture now, when I don't really think it was prior to Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film. I do think that his film is important in that regard, especially because it really was the film that opened the floodgates. Now, before I continue and catch any flack, I do want to acknowledge that yes, Blade and the first X-Men had already come out prior to this film, but with both of those being edgier properties, this was really the first film of that era to connect with people of all ages. You know, very similar to the last film that I reviewed in collaboration with Anthony for his channel, Night at the Museum, I also remember watching this film in theaters and my experience watching it very vividly. I'll never forget, it was opening day, my dad took me and my sister, and it was empty, which once again shows just how much, you know, the superhero films have kind of changed culture, because nowadays, or I mean pre-COVID anyway, whenever you went to go see a movie, or whenever you go to see a movie, that, especially a superhero movie or any big budget blockbuster, the lines are out the door. But that day was totally empty, and we went to go see it, going back to what I said before, me, my sister, my dad, a little boy, a teenage girl, and a grown-ass man went to go see this movie, and we all walked out of it with a varying positive reaction. So, while I didn't realize it then, I think looking back now, that's the biggest indicator of just how special this film is. That even though it's about a teenager who develops these strange superpowers, it's a coming-of-age story that really anybody can relate to. Talking a little bit more about the film itself, I think it's so cool and equally crazy that Sam Raimi, who at the time was mostly known for his work in horror, went on to helm this film. But I'm really glad that he did, because I don't think any other director would have done it as great as he did. This film is so true to both the look and feel of the comic books. And honestly, there's only one other film that came out at around the same time that is just as true to its source material, and that is, of course, Ang Lee's Hulk. That film literally used comic book panels as transitions, and it looked so cool. But nobody talks about that. In fact, nobody talks about this film at all because it sucked. Raimi's translation, on the other hand, is faithful in other ways, including the colors, the casting. I mean, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, really perfect. I mean, there are even direct quotes from the comics that have been around long enough that they've kind of taken on a life of their own. We all know what I'm talking about.
Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
I mean, the more I think about it, the more I believe that this film was really the blueprint for all modern-day superhero films. Now, I know I haven't gone into too much detail about, like, the acting, but I don't think you need me to tell you how great Tobey Maguire was in this, even though now he's definitely a certifiable meme, or just how perfectly balanced it is as a comedy, a drama, and action film all at once. But I do want to talk to you about this film and the context of its release, and especially in regards to what it means as a New Yorker, because, you know, I'm from New York. If you didn't know, now you know. This film was released right after 9/11, and I mean, everybody was kind of down in the dumps. It was a strange time to be alive, much like it is now. And I'll never forget watching this film, mostly because of that scene at the end where Spider-Man is facing off against the Green Goblin, and he has to make two choices to save, you know, the vehicle with all the people in it and Mary Jane. And he thinks he's alone, and then lo and behold, he gets help from some of the ship workers below that say, "We're gonna bring the boat to you." And you get the people on the bridge that are screaming, "Oh, you mess with Spider-Man, you mess with all of us." Even, like, I know it sounds silly, but even, you know, just thinking about it and rewatching the film for this review, it kind of brought back a little emotion, because it really added a layer of depth to this film, and it reminded people that even, you know, against all odds, when we work together, we can overcome even the greatest of evils. And I think that was such a excellently timed message. And yeah, there was actually some controversy. Well, not controversy, but, you know, the Twin Towers are originally featured in the film, and I think even in one trailer, you can correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments, but and they had to be, like, later removed or whatever. But I do think that even though this film kind of had somewhat of an attachment to them at one point, it kind of made up for it with that extra meaning, and I thought it was beautiful, and I still think it's beautiful. And I mean, people who watch it, like maybe like kids for the next generation that watch it, may not understand that context. It may just be like, oh, cool, you know, they're helping Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin. But I think for people who watched it at that time, it will forever have that special meaning. And I think that alone makes this film a bona fide classic, even though a lot of people will speak very highly of its sequel, Spider-Man 2, which is also, in my opinion, one of the greatest comic book films of all time. But you have to understand it, the foundation that this film lays. Like, I would say the same thing about Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Like, The Dark Knight is a great film, but without Batman Begins, like, not that it would fall apart, but it wouldn't mean as much. And I think that just the way that Sam Raimi built this world is so fantastic. We won't talk about how it all falls apart in the third one, but for what it's worth, this film is one of the purest comic book films ever made. In my opinion, anyway. And for all that, I'm going to give this film 5 stars.
Shazam!
Once again, I want to thank Anthony so much for letting me be a part of this collaboration and letting me talk about what I'm pretty sure he knows now is one of my favorite comic book films of all time. If you guys want to see more reviews from me, feel free to subscribe to my channel, Pillot Productions. I'm pretty sure he'll leave a link down below in the description box. But enough of me talking. What did you think, Anthony?
Alright guys, quick little random insert in here. So I actually refilmed this review, and the reason that I'm telling you this is because I just filmed a much longer review than the first one, which is what you've been watching this whole time. When I filmed it, for some reason, it did not record, or it wasn't in any of my memory. When I deleted some other stuff that I no longer needed from my memory card, yeah, that video came back, but only half. So it must have recorded half of the review, then it cut out halfway, but it didn't show up in my library of videos. And then after I deleted the other stuff, when there was space opened up, it showed up, but only half of it. So I'm using the next half of the second review that I used, the stuff that I didn't have from the first one. So if it seems a little not connected, hopefully it all makes sense to you guys. Obviously, when you film two completed videos and now I'm trying to splice them together, it doesn't work. I was gonna edit down just the second video where I talked about the fact that it was a second video, but then I was like, I liked the way I was talking in the first video, because that was really the one I was the most proud of, and this was kind of like the retake. I also wanted to mention really quickly that I just realized while I'm editing that I completely forgot in the first part of my review, and now that I lost the second part of the original part, I forgot to mention J.K. Simmons, which is just, how do you forget that? Absolutely phenomenal casting. He took the character from the original shows, from all the animated shows, just everything, the comic book pages, like, I mean, just perfect casting. When you look across majority of the Spider-Man things that have ever come out that have J. Jonah Jameson, especially in like the animated world, a lot of it is very similar. That same kind of character and the voice has always been there. And for J.K. Simmons to just embody that so perfectly in the movie, I thought was great. And also, before we continue on with the next part of my review, again, it's going to feel a little bit weird, but just Pillot Productions. Isn't he a phenomenal reviewer? I mean, did anybody else listen to that amazing review? Anyway, let's go ahead and get back to the review. Thank you guys for watching this far. A big thanks to Pillot Productions for being here in this video. Loved hearing your thoughts, my friend, and definitely look forward to having you in more videos as time goes on. It seems like for the most part we have the same outlook on this movie, that it is a great movie. I really enjoyed having you in the video, and again, if you guys want to find the link to his channel, it's down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you, and yeah, I'm just going to wrap up my thoughts on this movie. Overall, I find this movie to be an incredibly well-directed, well-acted, and very well-put-together film that, again, has emotion, has heart, has charm. It does such a great job of allowing you to be on this journey with Peter and really feel for his character. And I feel like anybody who's been a longtime fan of comic books, comic book characters, whether it was from the actual pages themselves or from video games or from the various animated shows, I think that you can watch this movie and just really thoroughly enjoy the way that they're able to take some creative liberties, but for the most part, really make this a film that honors that original legacy of Spider-Man. If I had to say one thing that has always bugged me about this movie that really stands out, is Green Goblin's costume. As a kid, I was a huge fan of the Green Goblin, and he's had tons of different iterations in the comics, including one where he's almost essentially like the Hulk. But what I really enjoy about the Green Goblin, at least the classic one, is that costume, you know, that classic Goblin costume, and the fact that even though it was still a mask, you know, the mask kind of formed to the face, and that was the face of the Goblin. I understand what they were going for. It's definitely a unique and different look. It makes sense for the fact that he, you know, works for this corporation and he has this suit that goes with this, you know, device that he's flying on. But I would have loved to have seen them in some way, shape, or form have the Goblin come out of him a little bit more, rather than it just being the dual personality. I think they handle it beautifully, so do not get me wrong. But if I had to nitpick something that I wish was different every time I watch it, it's the Green Goblin suit. But even with that, can you imagine if Willem Dafoe had just had the better costume? I mean, it would have been, I can't even imagine how much better it would have been. But overall, he's already phenomenal because it's already top notch. The voice, the acting, the demeanor, everything about him, the mannerisms when he's playing the two different characters. Willem Dafoe is one of the biggest highlights of comic book movie history ever, and in this movie, of course, he's one of the biggest highlights in the movie. Tobey Maguire, Willem Dafoe, James Franco, J.K. Simmons, Kirsten, Dunst, so many others. An incredibly well-acted, directed film that has so many great moments, and if you are a fan of Spider-Man and you have not seen this movie, what are you doing? This is just one of those movies that came out at a perfect time in my life, where I remember seeing the marketing, I remember seeing the bags of chips, everything. It was everywhere. Spider-Man was everywhere, and it was one of my favorite movie-going experiences of all time, something I'll never forget. A movie with so much emotion, so much weight, and a really exciting, fun journey with some epic action. I'm going to stop rambling and repeating myself now. You guys can find the link to Pillot Productions down below in the description box. Go give them some love. Let them know I sent you. Hit that like button down below if you guys enjoyed the video. Comment your thoughts. What do you guys remember about when this movie came out? Did you go and see it in theaters? How was that experience for you? Where does this rank for you amongst all of the Spider-Man films? I definitely can't wait to continue my journey through talking about the Spider-Man movies that I love here on this channel, and some that are just okay. Definitely curious to hear what you guys will have to say along the way, and as usual, I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, bye-bye.